On September the 21st, 2004, a child protective worker made a home visit to the residence of Melissa Lucio. At this time, the home was found to be unsafe for children. Ants were seen crawling on the floor and mattress where the newborn baby Mariah was sleeping. There was a fan in the window that had no cover, leaving the blades exposed. Inside the refrigerator, there was only a rotten head of lettuce, a carton of eggs, and a plastic container of mayonnaise. The refrigerator had an odor of spoiled food. Ew. The pantry contained one small can of corn, a box of salt, sauce, a small box of infant mixed cereal, and empty condiment containers. There was a strong odor of urine throughout the house. Yes, this house for children smelled like piss. What? You see, today I have the case of Melissa Lucio and the death of her child Mariah. I'm going to tell you two sides of this story. You have the guilty and the innocent. So let's start with the guilty. You see, on the same day that the child services visited the home, they observed Robert. He was a 4-year-old with a dime-sized bruise on his stomach, an old scratch on his stomach that was about 3 inches long, and insect bites on his arms and legs. He was also observed to have had 2 staples on his head, reportedly from an injury he sustained from falling on the bed. You had Gabrielle, who was 3 years old. He was observed with a bite mark the size of 2 quarters on his left shoulder. You gotta ask, who the hell is biting these children? He had multiple scratches on his face and multiple insect bites on his arms and legs. You had Adriana, who was 2 years old. She was observed with a 1-inch linear scab on the top of her head and multiple insect bites on her back, arms, and legs. Her body was very dirty, with dried feces on her genital areas. Sarah was a 1-year-old, and she was observed to have a 1/2-inch cold sore on the bottom of her lip and multiple, yes, multiple insect bites on her arms, legs, and body. How are there so many insects in this house? What the hell is going on? Sarah also had an open circular mark on the right side of her leg that appeared to be infected with pus. She was observed to be wearing neither underwear nor a diaper. Her body was very dirty with dried feces on her areas. Then you had Mariah, who's the victim in this story. He was observed to have tremors every once in a while. And remember, what I'm describing to you is not the crime scene or the time of the murder. This is the house in general. Mariah was also observed to have a small light green bruise on her right foot. No other visible marks were seen. All of the children appeared as if they had not been bathed. Their hair appeared to be matted and dirty. Their bodies appeared to be dirty, and all of the children had a strong body odor. Who are these adults living like this? These poor children. And by the way, last I checked, when I had a bruise, it's purple. Since when are they green? So let me tell you now about their mother, Melissa Elizabeth Lucio. She was born in June 1969. She had previously been married and had several other children during this marriage. She actually had 12 children in total at the time of Mariah's death on February the 17th, 2007. 2-year-old Mariah was the youngest of the children. It's not clear whether her husband, Robert Alvarez, was the biological father of Mariah, although Child Protective Services records indicate that he was. In fact, you know what's even more insane? Melissa herself, she gave birth to twins in October 2007 while she was incarcerated for this offense in jail. The story I'm about to tell you, she gave birth while she was in jail, ready to be prosecuted. What? Now, on February 17th, 2007, at 7 p.m., this was a Saturday, paramedics were dispatched to an apartment where Melissa lived with 9 of her children and Robert Alvarez, who was the father of at least 7 of these children. One of the paramedics testified that when the paramedics entered the apartment, they found Mariah unattended and lying on her back in the middle of the floor, not breathing and with no pulse. The paramedics observed that Melissa's distant and not overly distressed behavior was so far out of the ordinary that Melissa told police and paramedics at the scene that Mariah had fallen down the stairs. Mariah was transported to a hospital emergency room where she was pronounced dead. The condition of Mariah's body indicated she had been severely abused. There were bruises in various stages of healing covering her body. There were bite marks on her back. One of her arms had been broken, probably about 2 to 7 weeks before her death. And she was missing portions of her hair where it had been pulled out by the roots. Now, you guys have watched many crime stories, right? How often do you hear people say she's missing portions of her hair? Huh? The emergency room physician testified that this was the absolute worst case of child abuse that he had seen in his 30 years of practice. Certainly wasn't mincing his words. He also testified that his emergency room visual and manual inspection of Mariah indicated no apparent signs of a head injury. The chief forensic pathologist who conducted Mariah's autopsy testified that Mariah's cause of death was blunt force head trauma, which would have occurred within 24 hours prior to her death. And it would have been immediately apparent that Mariah was in distress and in need of medical attention. You see, the pathologist testified that Mariah suffered multiple contusions to her head area, and that blunt force head trauma basically means struck about the head with something like an object, a hand, or maybe she was. The pathologist testified that these injuries would not have been caused by falling down the stairs, and this was the most severe case he'd seen. But this is where the waters get a little muddy. You see, on that night, several investigators questioned Melissa for about 5 hours, beginning at 10 p.m. Melissa initially told the police that Mariah had fallen down the stairs, and for about 3 hours she denied any knowledge of how Mariah became so badly bruised and suggested that her older children could have been responsible. Now, Texas Ranger Escalon, he began to question Melissa about 2.5 hours into the interrogation. Escalon said at the trial that while he observed her investigators questioning her, he could tell from Melissa's demeanor that she was tired, but she was hiding the truth. He testified that Melissa began to open up with him after about 20 minutes of questioning, specifically with him. You see, Melissa's recorded statement reflects that she told Escalon that she only had been striking Mariah since December 2006. Melissa stated that Robert Alvarez never did this to Mariah, and that Alvarez was unaware of most of the bruises on Mariah's body. Melissa also stated that none of the other children did this to Mariah, and no one except Melissa struck Mariah. Melissa also stated that Mariah had been in her care for at least the previous 3 days. The jury also saw Melissa on the videotape demonstrate with a doll how she abused Mariah. Melissa also stated that she would strike Mariah when she got mad. Melissa also described how she pinched Mariah's private area and how she would sometimes grab and squeeze Mariah's arm. I know, you're sick and pissed off already, but in a court of law, how damning is this? You see, Melissa described how she bit Mariah twice on the back and different times about 2 weeks before Mariah's death. Melissa said that on one occasion she bit Mariah on the back for no reason while she was combing Mariah's hair. She said in court, "I just did it." Melissa stated that Mariah was sick on the day that she died, but that she was afraid to take Mariah to the doctor because of all the bruises on her. Melissa also stated that Mariah would not eat and that her breathing was heavy. In fact, Mariah slept all day on February 17th, and she would lock her teeth together when Melissa would try to feed her. This was consistent with blunt force head trauma symptoms that the pathologist described. Now, of course, in the trial, the prosecutor will try and portray the criminal in as bad a light as possible. You've all seen it. But it was revealed that Melissa committed several disciplinary violations in the county jail. In fact, in jail, this crackpot, she was fighting and having verbal disagreements with other inmates. She was caught with possession of contraband, unauthorized communication with other people, and being disrespectful to guards. But the defense characterized these incidents as minor. Now, in the trial, the state presented the testimony of a person called Estrada, who was a CPS caseworker. Testifying under a grant of transactional immunity because there was talk about CPS being indicted, Estrada testified that CPS removed Mariah and all of the children from Melissa's care due to physical neglect and negligent supervision just after Mariah was born in 2004. They placed all the children in foster care. Melissa did visit Mariah while she was in foster care, and then in 2006 the CPS returned Mariah and 8 other children back to Melissa's home. But keep in mind, the prosecution claimed, what did the children guarantee them? Why so many children? Why the need to have the children back? It's clear from the evidence so far, she didn't care. Well, they said it was the food stamp money that she converted to drugs and the AFDC checks that she also converted to drugs. That's what the children represented to her, money and drugs. And at this point it was clear because she wasn't feeding them, she wasn't caring for them, and she wasn't taking them to the doctor. In fact, this is what the prosecutor literally said. So why? Why would you want to have 13 children? Is it because the state of Texas gives you money? And because that's evident by the fact that they were evicted under the investigation for failure to pay your rent? That the house was a pig pen, according to some of the reports. Why? Well, if you're getting $24,000 to $2,500 a month and you're working, why do you not have the resources to buy groceries? Oh, it's because you're buying cocaine. Again, that's quite a damning statement, right? Furthermore, Melissa told the police during her recorded statement that she was not close to Mariah because the CPS removed Mariah from her 3 weeks after she was born. No, you muppet. There's a reason why they removed her. The CPS worker Estrada also testified about the various contacts that CPS had had with Melissa before Mariah's death. Estrada testified that the CPS investigated various allegations, usually involving allegations of neglect and neglectful supervision. Now check this out. They had investigations in 95, 96, 98, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, and 2004. What the hell is wrong with this woman or family, including her husband? It was said that Melissa often tested positive for cocaine and that 2 of her newborns tested positive for cocaine during this period of time. That's fucking disgraceful. Okay, there's more to this story, right, where they claim her innocence, and I'm coming on to that, but that in itself is undeniable. The babies were born, right, or they were tested for cocaine inside of them. That is fucking unacceptable. Pardon my French. In the trial, it was revealed since 2004, Melissa had about 17 or 18 positive cocaine tests. Now, in response to all of this, the defense suggested that it should cross-examine Estrada. So the defense said that the CPS should not have returned the children to a parent who tested positive for drugs. Well, duh, don't you think? Estrada also testified that Melissa tested negative in 2 drug tests that were offered between 2006 and 2007. Oh, so she wasn't always crackers, huh? In her recorded statement, Melissa told the police that she had not used drugs since February, but that Alvarez had recently begun using crack cocaine. The police in the house found paraphernalia for smoking crack cocaine in a search of Melissa's apartment after Mariah's death. The pathologist said that Mariah had cocaine in her blood at the time of her death. What? In the trial, other evidence was presented that Melissa received about $5,000 per month in welfare benefits, most of which the state claimed Melissa used to support cocaine. Now, during the closing arguments in the trial, the state emphasized the horrific circumstances of this offense, Melissa's history of violence against Mariah, and her misbehavior in the county jail in arguing that this isn't going to end with Mariah. This violent behavior is going to continue. Now, this is what the state said about her in court also in the closing argument. Check this out. Have you ever heard anything like this? Check this. They said, this defendant is like a dog that bites a human person. Once that dog bites, there will always be a probability that it will bite again. Same thing with this defendant. Her record speaks to you. This isn't going to end here. This isn't going to end with Mariah. This is going to continue. Wow. Have you ever heard a prosecutor refer to the suspect as a dog, as in subhuman? Wow. So, in 2008, Melissa was sentenced to death. But there was a twist. You see, after long campaigning, the Innocence Project took the case, and this is what they claim. They say Mariah fell down a flight of stairs while the family was moving home. The toddler had a mild physical disability that made her unstable while walking and prone to tripping. 2 days later, she took a nap and didn't wake up. Instead of taking the steps to learn about Mariah's health history and investigating the causes of her injuries, authorities immediately jumped to the conclusion that she had been murdered, and then, through a coercive interrogation, pressured Miss Lucio to make a false statement. Miss Lucio has maintained her innocence on death row for more than 14 years. In fact, during her interrogation, Miss Lucio asserted her innocence more than 100 times, until she was manipulated into falsely taking responsibility for some of Mariah's injuries by police officers. The Innocence Project claimed that the interrogating officers refused to hear the truth, that Melissa did not and would not ever hurt her children. Detectives themselves rushed to the judgment, and just 2 hours after Mariah died, took Miss Lucio in for questioning. And during this interrogation, officers berated her, intimidated her, and Lucio at the time, who of course was pregnant, she was in shock from the loss of her child, and she was interrogated for 5 hours. It's clear the conditions were not ideal. It was said they used coercive methods known to produce false confessions. Research has shown that survivors of sexual abuse and violence, like Miss Lucio, are even more vulnerable to falsely confessing under such conditions. And experts who have reviewed Miss Lucio's case, including her interrogation records, concluded that she was relentlessly pressured and extensively manipulated during the interrogation. After several hours of interrogation, she said, "Yes, I guess I did it," and made other incriminating statements to get the officers to end the interrogation. Her inadvertent statement was then characterized by the prosecution as a confession to murder. 2 of the officers who interrogated Lucio were present at Mariah's autopsy, leading to a biased autopsy process. An incomplete investigation into Mariah's health history and causes of her injuries and death. The Innocence Project claimed at Miss Lucio's trial, the medical examiner testified that the bruises and injuries on Mariah's body could only have been caused by abuse. However, pathologists who have reviewed the evidence have concluded that this testimony was false. Mariah's autopsy showed signs of a blood coagulation disorder which causes profuse bruising throughout the body. At the time of her death, Mariah was healing from an injury to her arm, which the medical examiner also said was a sign of abuse. However, a pediatric orthopedic surgeon who reviewed the evidence concluded that the medical examiner's testimony was misleading, and that there is nothing about Mariah's fracture that indicates that it was the result of an intentional act or abuse. This was an extremely common type of injury among toddlers that can result from a fall from standing height. The medical examiner also testified at trial that a mark on Mariah's body were bite marks. In fact, bite mark analysis has been wholly discredited since this was presented at this specific trial, because it had no scientific basis. Studies have shown that even trained forensic dentists can't agree whether or not an injury is a bite mark. And in 2016, in recognition of the fact that bite mark evidence lacks scientific validity, and following the exoneration of a man in Texas convicted based on faulty bite mark evidence, the Texas Forensic Science Commission recommended a statewide moratorium on the use of bite marks evidence in criminal cases. That's actually huge. They're basically saying, okay, bite marks, they're not valid anymore. Now, thousands of pages of CPS records show that Miss Lucio's children never said she was violent with them, and no case workers noted signs of abuse. No physical evidence showed otherwise. This is in direct contradiction on what was claimed during the trial, right? They said that the state presented no physical evidence or witness testimony establishing that Lucio abused Mariah or all of the children. Judge Katerina Haynes wrote on behalf of the 7 dissenting judges from the US Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. She said the jury was deprived of key evidence to weigh, and this is crucial. Miss Lucio struggled at times to provide for her family, but she was a caring mother who did her best given her incredibly difficult circumstances. Again, this is according to the Innocence Project. They said Miss Lucio is a survivor of lifelong repeated sexual assault and domestic violence. In fact, she was abused as a child when she was 6. She endured abuse throughout her childhood into her teenage years. She became a child bride at 16. However, Miss Lucio's husband perpetuated the cycle of abuse. Still a minor and unable to leave the abusive marriage, Lucio was trapped and developed a substance use problem. Her husband later abandoned her and their 5 children at that time. After that, Melissa Lucio had 9 more children. This of course included Mariah. Her next partner, who was also abusive, repeatedly sexually assaulted her and threatened to kill her. A psychologist who reviewed recent testing of Melissa said that Melissa has highly abnormal levels of vulnerability to police coercion because of her background. Now, on April 12th, attorneys for Melissa filed a supplemental clemency application, including a new declaration from a 5th juror, Melissa's jury foreperson. They joined the call of other jurors on the case to halt Melissa's pending execution or grant her a new trial where new evidence of her innocence can be considered. For example, the jury never learned about the extent of Lucio's history of child sexual abuse and domestic violence and how it shaped her reactions immediately following her daughter's death. The trial court prohibited the testimony but allowed the Texas Ranger, who forced her incriminating statement. For the prosecution, her slumped posture, passivity, and failure to make eye contact told them she was guilty. Without that context, the jury was undoubtedly swayed by Miss Lucio's statement and the Texas Ranger's testimony about her demeanor during the interrogation, the context of her child abuse. The omission of this crucial evidence was particularly damaging because the prosecution had a weak case for capital murder and an even weaker case for the death sentence. And at that point, Miss Lucio had no prior record of violence. So lacking solid physical evidence, Cameron County District Attorney Armando Villalobos presented Miss Lucio's conciliatory statement to the jury as a confession to homicide and sought the death penalty. At the time, he actually was seeking re-election and came under fire for failing to thoroughly investigate or prosecute more than 100 previous allegations of child abuse. Ahead of the election, he sought to make an example of Miss Lucio, which helped him appear tough on crime. In fact, today he's serving a 13-year federal prison sentence for bribery and extortion. This dirty motherfucker. Regardless of what she did, that doesn't mean you capitalize and you try and further your own political career, dirty dog. So to conclude on this story, in 2022, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals issued a stay of execution and ordered the 138th Judicial District Court of Cameron County to consider new evidence of Lucio's innocence in the death of her daughter. She's been awarded a new trial. That is a whirlwind of a story. And you know something? There's a case to be made that her child abuse and the way they treated her during the interrogation, yes, definitely affected the case. But I go back to the house, ingesting cocaine, ants, no diapers. That's no way to treat children. So she certainly had to, she had to be convicted for something. Child abuse, child neglect, whatever you want to call it. Death sentence, murder, I don't know. Comment, tell me what you think.